Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, and welcome to another episode of Competitive Contenders. This is the series where I take a budget deck list of under $100 and then try and face off against the metagame. So this time we're going to be taking a look at Salamangreat, and I'll put up the poll on screen for you guys right now. This did take place prior to the December 2020 ban list. However, I do think that obviously Salamangreat hasn't changed for quite some time, so it's a perfect opportunity to do so. And additionally, I think the meta is shifting in a direction that Salamangreat can do a little bit better in, at least compared to last format. And this, of course, is a fan favorite deck, so not really too surprising here. Some of you guys were asking why do an episode on this deck in particular, since it is quite solved and everybody kind of knows what it does by now. The deck's been out for 2 years, but the main question to ask for is, can this deck even do anything without access code Talker, since access code is the primary win condition, and you can see the replacement here being Zeroboros. But I think that we can do a pretty decent showcase of what the deck is trying to do just overall, and then kind of cross the win-con bridge when we get there. I'll note right now before we get started that I'm not a very good Salamangreat pilot. This is not a deck that I am super familiar with operating myself. Obviously, I've played against it and I'm familiar with it and things of that nature. But as far as playing the deck myself, I've only done it on very rare occasions, and it's a deck that, quite honestly, I'm not as good at compared to other decks. So if you see misplays, I'll point them out for sure, but definitely go a little bit easy on me, because this is definitely not a deck that I am as well versed in as most other people who are familiar with the decks. So keep that one in mind, and I'll mention that as well later when we get into the games. But on screen for you guys right now, I will throw up the price breakdown. And you can see that apart from Ash and I guess Drill in the side deck, it's very, very flexible. You know, you guys can play a wide variety of different hand traps or just board breakers or various tech cards if you want to kind of play against your local metagame or accommodate your own budget. There's a lot of room in the budget to actually kind of experiment with, which is a luxury in this series because we don't get that very often. So if you want to, by all means, incorporate cards like the Beeroo, for example, you can feel free to do that. But this is just, of course, a sample to go off of as per usual. Now, if you guys do want to go ahead and purchase any of these cards or pick up the Salamangreat deck for yourselves, definitely feel free to use my TCG Player affiliate link down in the description box below if you want to help support the channel at no additional cost to you. And additionally, if you guys do want to help support this series, as well as just any additional long-form content on the channel in general, definitely also check out my Patreon. That link's in the description box as well if you want to help support me in that respect. But without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and just get into the deck list here. Not going to explain too much since, again, this deck is quite well established, but we got the obligatory Gazelle, followed by the 2 Foxy and 2 Spinny. These have been cut down for quite some time now, simply because you just want a variety of salad names and you want the engine to be pretty compact. So these are all functionally just extenders, and you know, these are all once per turn, right? So you just want a plethora of different ones. And you don't want to clog on too many normal summons either. Then we have the 2 copies of Jack Jaguar. Definitely need to play 2 with Wakero and Didi Crow re-entering the format. And I also honestly kind of considered playing this at 3, but I thought, nah, that's a little bit too much. But I think 2 is just the standard number right now. And then we have Falco for the recursion. Then we have 3 Parallel Exceed. I'm not going to lie, this card is not my favorite in this deck, although I understand why it is being played. It's an extender. It's better in the access code build, obviously, but it's still fine in this build where you can make like Update Jammer and things of that nature and just Clean Climb. However, I think that this kind of compounds Salamangreat's weakness to Nibiru, even though like the deck already loses to it, but this kind of just doesn't help that cause. If anything, it plays in it harder. But still, this is a worthwhile card to play because it is better than just running like even more salad names that aren't going to be conducive to just getting as much value as this card has. Then we have the kind of hot topic of Debug versus Buffalo. Which one do you play? Do you play a combination of them? I asked you guys on the community tab poll, and I also have been looking around and checking out various profiles, and there doesn't seem to be any consensus still on which one is better. I like Debug in the fact that it is consistent in terms of what it guarantees to get you to. And I think right now you kind of just need access to a play that'll be very much guaranteeing you to combo off, rather than Buffalo, which even though it's a lot safer and it helps protect against like hand traps or just various disruption cards right now in the format, which there are a lot of to stop Debug, Buffalo still can sometimes be a bit awkward to where, for one, you might not even have a Cybers to pitch, which can definitely happen. But for another, like the cards that you draw might not help you get to where you need to be in certain instances, which can be unfortunate at times. So even though I do like Buffalo, I like that card a lot actually, just especially the way it interacts in this deck. I ultimately ended up with debug, just because I think that having that guaranteed gazelle is a little bit better. But I wouldn't fault you at all for playing Buffalo, and if you wanted to play like some mix, you can definitely opt for that as well. Again, there's just no consensus right now, so I'm not going to say that this is the correct opinion, but I think it's personally the better decision, just by a slim margin. Next up, we got the hand traps. So we got 3 Ash, 3 Skullmeister, and 3 Ghost Spell. This is like a lot of the popular hand traps right now, particularly Meister Bell being kind of the forefront of what the metagame is shaping up to be. Notably, the meta might evolve into a direction of like DD Crow being more popular, and even like Psycho Reader for Drytron, but we don't care about that. But DD Crow in particular is possibly going to be popular again, so Ghost Spell actually kind of helps out against that, which is cool. But apart from that, again, we have a very graveyard-reliant sort of metagame with Eldlich and Drytron and Virtual World. So those are things to keep in mind. We got then for spells, 3 Desires and 3 Silent Mining, as well as the 1 Circle. All of this is pretty staple. Then we have 3 Will of the Salamangreat. I know like a lot of lists, pretty much every single one are playing 2 right now, but in a format where I think you want just more extenders to push past your opponent's disruptions, I think this card is incredibly valuable. I mean, sure, it can clog, but the thing is that like this card helps you a lot in the grind, which there are going to be a lot more grindy games now because of course just Eldritch being everywhere. And I think that this card is just better than a lot of the other extenders you could possibly throw in here. And I think it also helps play past Nibiru. There's just a lot of good benefits to this card. You can like pitch it off mining, get it back later. You can like afford to banish more Desires if you're playing more. I just think that playing 3 right now is pretty good, and I think that I personally like this card a lot. Then we got the Sanctuary, and then 2 Cosmic. This is like the flex spot, but I chose this for Eldritch since just more coverage is nice. And then 2 Rage and 2 Roar. I think you can actually play 2 traps again, or 2 of each trap, and not feel too bad about it, because the format has slowed down a little bit from the last one, so that's pretty nice. You can insulate yourself from Desires just a little bit more, or open up with them and be pretty nice going first. The extra deck is very staple, apart from, of course, the absence of access codes. So we got Baguska, followed by Dweller, and then Zeroboros. Transcode update. Zeroboros is the replacement for access code. It's big, and it clears threats, and it can attack twice with Update Jammer, which is pretty much the major reason for it. You could play like Borreload or Magnetic Crusader Avamax if you want to instead. Just depends on what you value more. But I like this card quite a lot. Then we got Phoenix for clearing back row, which is more prevalent. This could be Lingeribo if you wanted to, and that's not too bad. You could also play Link's Spider if you really want to play past Nibiru in some cases, which there are times where I do want the Link Spider, but I figured that it wasn't coming up enough to justify it, so I ended up cutting it for the Phoenix. Then we have the Splash Mage, which is a cool extender. 2 Heat Leo, then 3 Sunlight Wolf, and 3 Baelings. And then the side deck is nothing special at all. We got Pankratops, 3 Lancia for like Dino and Virtual World, things like that. Then we have Joel for pretty much Drytron, Feather Duster, Cosmic, the 3rd one, and the 3 Twin Twister for back row, and then the 3 Strike. This could honestly be other cards if you want to replace this. I had these in the main deck actually for a little bit, but I realized that like this card is better going second if you have it paired with other cards such as like Torrential, and if we're not playing those, then this card becomes a lot worse going second. So I figured that I'd rather have hand traps which are more applicable in either scenario than this card, which is only really optimal going first, which is what I'm setting it for. But that is going to be it for the deck list, and without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into the games here. So our first matchup here is going to be up against Orcust, and this is apparently 2019 Yu-Gi-Oh! Because we got Salamangreat versus Orcust. You can see that we've drawn the Sanctuary, which is amazing, but this hand is alright if we were going first, but unfortunately our opponent has won the RPS and has decided to go first here. And again, I'm just going to put this disclaimer out here in case you guys skipped directly to this part of the video. I'm not a great Salamangreat pilot, I'll say this straight up. This is not a deck that I am super seasoned with, so definitely forgive me for the misplays that you might witness, because I will also be pointing those out in the process. But we're going to go ahead and start this matchup here. So opponent starts off with a copy of Redeployment pitching a Boots, so they're on the Famnite stuff as well. They're going to Radiator pitching the Megaform, and they're going to bring back the Megaform, popping the Radiator, then using the Megaform effect to get a Metal Cruncher from deck, which would reveal 3 Scrap Recycler, but he already had one, but he gets a duplicate to his hand anyways. Then he's going to Recycler for a copy of Citadel, so he is on that as an interruption as well. He's going to then go into Wyvern, and then go and bring back the Citadel, as well as the Scrap Golem, and that's going to bring back the Recycler as well, which will send a copy of World Wand. He's going to go into Lib, the World Key Blade Master, set a copy of Succession, then go for a copy of Scrap Golem, which will bring back the Recycler yet again. This time it's going to be sending a copy of Orcust Nightmare. From here, he's going to go into Masquerena and then Avamax, and now this can't be destroyed by card effects either. He's going to use the Jackalope to hit itself and then bring out a Nessie before going into a copy of World Wand for the Nightmare. Going into Galatea, that's going to recycle back the wand and then set the Babel from deck. He's then going to use Symbol to bring back the Nightmare, overlay for a copy of Ding, attach the Symbol, and then go for another copy of Galatea. From here, he's going to use the Brute City Pitch at the start of the turn to get a Fob Blade and pass. So this is not an IP because they already used it for the Avamax. So I know the disruptions are similar for Ding pretty much. The Fob Blade as well as Citadel, which can definitely be problematic because, again, this is a deck that is normal summon reliant. So our hand is not looking amazing, but it's looking playable. And we draw the Cosmic, which is nice. So now I'm like, all right, we can get rid of one interruption guaranteed. I decided to go for the Babel because, of course, that is going to be more permanent. I want to out that as soon as possible. He goes ahead and brings back his Ding so he can just attach and then have a little bit more board presence that way. I then follow up with a copy of Circle, which does get Ash Blossom, so that immediately makes our hand far, far weaker. We aren't really able to do anything. And we do the Sanctuary, you know. It happens. I go ahead and relink the Balinks because I try and recover as best as I can, but honestly, we're not going to get super far. I don't even know how we're going to try and clear the Avamax. So the only real out is to maybe go 0 Boros and then like banish the whole field. But the problem here is the Citadel, which is just going to pop any non-Salamangreat monster that I can. That's why I relinked to the Balinks earlier to get this Balinks Engrave ASAP. And my opponent actually preemptively uses the Fob Blade on this wolf, which I didn't use the effect you noticed since the only monster I had engraved was Balinks. And again, I need that Balinks engrave for the Citadel, so I didn't even use the add back for the fire yet. Here I just tried to kind of recover and stabilize, but really the game is pretty much over. I could have, I guess, gone for like Svinian and Vitullo to try and like lower one of their monsters, but that really wasn't going to change the outcome of the game that much. My opponent goes for a Ding on his turn after drawing a Call by the Grave. I grab Gazelle off the circle once he sends off the Ding so I can trigger it and hopefully try and survive a little bit longer, but that is not going to be the case. He has Wand, he has Symbol, he has everything pretty much, and another normal summon copy of Recycler to send a copy of Gizmic. He summons a Zero Boros himself, and then he goes and uses the Citadel to get the Balinks out of my grave, calling by the Sunlight Wolf, even though it doesn't really matter too much at this point. He's going to Symbol back the Galatea, and then go for Gizmic, and I've decided, let's go ahead and just go to game 2. So you can see from that game 1, sort of some of the problems with Salamangreat is that if you don't open any hand traps and you're going second, the engine itself might not get you there a lot of the time, and that is a little bit unfortunate. But we are going first this time, so we can go ahead and try and set up. Now our hand is playable but not amazing. We can start off with a normal summon copy of Jack Jaguar and then going Balinks, Chaining Parallel Exceed to get a copy of Sanctuary to hand, as well as triggering the Exceed to get another one from the deck. Here we can overlay for Abyss Warrior, which is nice in this matchup. Then we can go for Sanctuary to relink and then set our traps and pass. I kind of hesitated here, if you noticed, on the Will if I wanted to use it, but ultimately I didn't want to commit into Nibiru too hard. Like if I got Nibiru here, at least could still turn on my Roar and that would be okay, even though it wouldn't have been the best case scenario. But if I used the Will to kind of try and greed a little bit harder, then that would have not ended up well for me if my opponent had Nibiru, so ultimately I decided just not to go for it. My opponent uses the Gizmic in the end phase, and then I use Dweller in the draw phase, which gets Ghost Ogred. I'm not too upset about that. Here, I make a mistake. I let the Recycler go, forgetting that Gizmic actually has an effect on the field, and I'm like, oh man, I really do not want to, like burn my Balinks in the graveyard, and then he just goes battle phase here, attacks twice, and clears my Balinks anyway. So I'm like, oh man, I really should have actually just roared away the Recycler so he never got this Nightmare into the grave to begin with, and then here I would have been fine just letting the Balinks protect the Balinks on the field, and if you went battle phase, I also had the Roar to kind of clear, or sorry, the Rage to get rid of it. But misplays aside, I decided to just go ahead and roar this, cut my losses because I already did mess up. But my opponent luckily doesn't have any other extenders, so we just go ahead and draw for a turn. Now my opponent just scoops here, and I don't know why. My opponent had a Ghost Ogre, and I didn't have a Balinks in graveyard, so if I went for a Will, he could have actually ogred it and I wouldn't have done anything about it. But I think he was just maybe afraid of the fact that I, would have had Roar back since I could just relink the Balinks and reset it. So my opponent probably thought that I just couldn't play through this roar and just conceded right there. That's the only thing that I could think of. So here we are in game number 3, and I opened hand traps this time, but not a lot of engine cards. So hopefully stopping our opponent will be enough here. My opponent starts off with a copy of Redeployment, which I will Ash promptly, and then he would go ahead and use Foolish Burial. I was hoping that I could save the Meister for an opportune moment, so I'm like, alright, let's see when I have to use the Meister. Depends on what he sends off Nightmare and what he's going to go for, but he has no normal summon, so he can never actually use this Nightmare to target anything to attack boost. Therefore, he actually just can't use it, being forced to pass now. I go ahead and draw a copy of Foxy for turn, which is pretty decent. I use its effect, even though maybe there's a world where I don't have to here, but I do pick up a Falco anyways. Then I go for a Balinx, which picks up a copy of Sanctuary. Gonna mining for this Gazelle, pitching the Falco, triggering the Gazelle, and then dumping a copy of Roar. Then I go for Desires, trying to draw into Extenders, and we don't get any. I go ahead and attack for some damage in case he has Nibiru, which he does. And I Falco this Gazelle back in hand, so I'm just guaranteed to have it. Just anticipating that my opponent might have Nibiru. He does. I'm not too upset about that. I still have 2 hand traps, so we're in a decent spot. And he draws the Fridge. Feels bad. I don't bother ashing, of course, because he already had a Wand Engrave, but he actually sent a duplicate copy of Wand, which I found to be interesting. I was expecting a symbol there. I do go ahead and use the Wand, or Meister when he uses the Wand effect, but him sending the second Wand actually proves to be useful there, because if this is a symbol, it would be just completely dead, whereas now he can just try the same thing again next turn, and I don't have a Meister this time. So I actually am now put on a little bit of a timer to where I really need to come up with something real quick. I go ahead and just normal this Gazelle. Obviously I don't want to use this mining just yet. I'm going to Falco back the Gazelle to the hand and then go into a copy of Balinx, triggering the Gazelle. This is going to go ahead and allow me to make a copy of Sunlight Wolf and then trigger the Jack Jaguar. Here I could have gone for a copy of possibly, Heatleo, and then Sanctuary relink it to Heatleo and then just set the Roar by its own effect. But this is what I was talking about by saying I am not very practiced with Salamangreat, but that is absolutely what I should have done, and that is just a series of misplays on my end. Here I instead just go for a very awkward Zeraboros play just to beat over it. Could have been a lot better, could have been cleaner, but ultimately my opponent just keeps bricking and he ends up conceding. Alright, so that Orcust match was a pretty good showcase against a fellow rogue deck, so let's move a little bit higher on the tier list towards the metagame. So here we got Invoked Dogmatika, and this should be a fairly interesting matchup because we have different hand traps from what Salamangreat traditionally plays, so we can interact a little bit differently. So opponent is going first because we lost a die roll again. They're going to go ahead and Meltdown for Alistair, and I'm upset to see Meltdown in particular because that shuts off our Ghost Spell. Normally you could Ghost Spell the Invocation since it does involve banishing cards from graveyards, but unfortunately Ghost Spell negates activations and Meltdown prevents that from happening. So I am forced to sit here and watch as my opponent makes a Secure Gardener and just goes into Hcabe, and I can't really do or say anything about it. I could Meister or Bell the Invocation Engrave, but I figured there's just no point to doing that. I might as well just save it for something more impactful. He's going to go ahead and follow with a copy of Ecclesia, getting a copy of Punishment and setting Punishment and Droplet and passing. We draw an Ash Return, right on time, although our opponent had a Tactic Silent anyways, so I guess that's fair. We're going to start with a copy of Circle. It gets Ash, and oh yeah, we can't play the game, unfortunately. So that was an embarrassing game number 1. We literally got our entire game ended by a singular Ash Blossom, so let's hope to do a little bit better in game number 2 here. We are going first. Now, I go ahead and normal summon Foxy, and I foolishly activate its effect, and you'll see why. It's not because I miss here, which unfortunately I do, as always, but it's because of this Ghost Spell. So I get a Sanctuary, then I use the Spinny Hand effect before using its Graveyard effect, which gets Ghost Spelled. Now, if I did this correctly, I would use the Foxy Engrave to pitch the Spinny. If that got belled, I can then use the Spinny to go ahead and summon itself, make a Sunlight Wolf, and then use the Will of the Salamangreat to bring back the Balinx and then add back Foxy. But I didn't do that right, and that's because, again, I am not the best pilot of this deck, so please do forgive me on that end. But we go ahead and make a copy of Wolf and then just set a Rage anyways, so we're in a decent spot, right? Until I see the copy of Cosmic and realize that it wouldn't have mattered if I added back Foxy because we're just probably going to die anyways. My opponent drew a Meltdown off of that upstart, which again turns off this Ghost Spell, and I am very, very sad. I did side in Lancia, but I didn't side this out for it. I just kept it in alongside of it, so, you know, there is nothing really to do about that. Opponent makes a Purgatrio, banishing the Foxy, so I guess that matters there. Giving us back the Spinny, which I guess is a small consolation prize, but the Ecclesia getting the access to both Maximus and the Fleur-de-Lis allows my entire board to just get completely annihilated in the battle phase, and we get straight up OTK'd. Unfortunate. So that's something that I think that Salamangreat has been struggling with, is just the fact that you can set up and do what Salamangreat is known for doing. Like, that wasn't even a bad hand per se, but you can just kind of get blown out by the fact that your opponent just has the answers, or their engine is able to accomplish more with fewer cards, sadly. But we're going to move on to our third match here, and it's going to be up against a Buster Blader Dragon Eldlich hybrid. This is kind of similar to like the Pyolists that we saw last format, which kind of fell off a little bit since the Buster engine kind of loses to a lot of the same cards that Mystic Bind does, in that Conquistador and Chucher both in the format very, very predominantly. So my opponent's going to start off with a copy of Magician's Souls and sending a copy of Dark Magician. I was super confused at this point. I thought it was actually just pure Dark Magicians until I saw the War of Thou for a copy of Buster Whelp. So that's going to add a copy of Prologue, and then he's going to make Striker Dragon into a Verite Anaconda, and sending Magicalized Fusion to summon out Dragoon. That's pretty cool. He's going to set a copy of Prologue and pass. I draw Ash on turn. We're going to go ahead and trigger Buffalo. This is the one match that I did test with it. My opponent's going to chain Prologue, and I chain Parallaxy, to which they chained a copy of Memories in Graveyard. So out comes the Buster Lock, and we're just going to try and get bodies here. We draw into a Gazelle, which is really nice. So my opponent doesn't negate any of this, letting all of this go through. I go ahead and summon a copy of Gazelle, which of course can't activate, so my opponent doesn't feel threatened by it. I then will back the copy of Bailings and just straight up hard make Zeroboros to attack over the Dragoon. You know, that really do be like that sometimes. My opponent draws another copy of Buster Whelp, but thankfully we do have the Ash for it this time. My opponent then uses the Golden Lord to send away Zeroboros, unfortunate, before making a copy of Soldier of Chaos. I'm not sure why my opponent sent away this Destroyer Swordsman here, simply because even though obviously it wasn't going to be able to attack directly, this Buster Dragon is going to the graveyard this turn because of Prologue's restriction. So I think my opponent might have overlooked that, and there goes the Buster Dragon. Now all we have to out is a BLS, which actually isn't too bad. Now I actually do make a bit of a blunder here, as you'll see. We go ahead and will back the Gazelle. That's going to send a copy of Rage to the graveyard. This should have been a Roar for sure. I then normal summon the Jack Jaguar and then make a Sunlight Wolf, putting back a monster to summon itself, and then adding back the Ash Blossom, because I figure that's pretty decent to just be able to have as a contingency. And then I relink into Wolf, and that is my mistake. So I go ahead and use the Wolf to add back the Rage, which is fine, but then I realize, oh, my out to this was making Heat Leo, targeting the Zeroboros to make my own Heat Leo 3k, and then crashing, protecting with Balinks. But I already used my relink off Sanctuary for this Wolf, so there's where I messed up. If I had gotten the Roar instead of this Rage, then when I relinked into the Heat Leo, I wouldn't have to relink to the Wolf because the Roar obviously can reset itself. So I'll have the Heat Leo plus the Roar's protection and the Ash and the Bell. So I wind up with the same number of interruptions, but he still has his BLS on the field. Luckily, my opponent doesn't draw anything that impactful. It's a Red MD, and because of the fact that Bailings protects, this prevents BLS from destroying a monster raid battle, which prevents it from thankfully wiping away parts of my board. So that's very fortunate. But we're going to not mess it up this time and actually do the right play for this turn. So we're going to go ahead and use Will to bring back the Gazelle to send Falco. That's going to add the Gazelle back to our hand so we can actually use it as another body. We then go for the Heat Leo, sending back the Gazelle from hand and then triggering the copy of Jaguar in graveyard. Then we go into a Bailings to put it in grave to protect our Heat Leo, doing the Update Jammer for the Transco because we do want to go for the OTK. I almost bring back Update Jammer, but that would have made the BOS co-linked, which would have been very bad because it would have been on 3500 then. But we do the Heat Leo to boost it via the Zeroboros in the graveyard, crash, and then attack with our double transcode plus the Sunlight Wolf for game. So that last game was a pretty good showcase of what I was talking about in the deck profile, to where because we're entering a more control-oriented format, you can expect those kinds of interactions to happen a bit more frequently, and that does definitely favor Salamangreat if the deck gets the chance to actually get to that point. And even though I was misplaying, and you guys saw those misplays that I pointed out, the deck was still able to actually take that game away pretty well. Now we're going to move into game 2 here, where our opponent's going to be going first, and I'll admit, this is kind of a weird one, and not a very great game towards the end of it, but you'll see what I mean. My opponent starts off with another copy of Buster Whelp. He's playing 52 cards, so hardly that is pretty good. He's then going to go for a copy of Striker Dragon after grabbing Prologue to go for Bootsucker Launch, which will allow him to summon a copy of Synchron. Then he's going to go into Spheres and Pass. Now this is a good pivot from the Dragoon because of the fact that, of course, you know, this deck is very normal summon reliant. So about to say the normal summon is really good if you don't specifically Will to deal with. We draw a copy of Sanctuary for turn, which is unfortunate, but hey, at least it allows us to use Desires without any consequence. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. We draw our 2 cards. It's just hand traps, which isn't really great, but we'll see what we can do here. I go ahead and normal summon the Foxy and don't use its effect, learning from our mistakes. And then we go ahead and be met with the Prologue combo into the Memories. Now, I do have a Meister for this, which is pretty good. It allows us to not have to contend with the Buster Blader lock, but wait. This is a dragon now, so I can't really make Balinks anymore, because that card requires a Cyberse monster. So that is definitely really unfortunate for us. So we're going to have to try and pivot a little bit here. I remember that, of course, Wolf is able to be made with fire monsters and not specifically Cyberses. So just go ahead and try and get the Spinny onto the board here. But unfortunately, that is going to be met by the Seal bouncing my normal summon. And even though I have another Meister for it, since it's not once per turn, we have no more extension and we have to pass our turn. Our opponent is going to use both of the Golden Lords, or Golden Lands rather, in the end phase and then draw for turn. Now my opponent makes weird plays here. He brings back the Buster Blader, which is fine, and then uses the Cursed Eldlich to get a search. But my opponent goes into Protector Whelp, which is also okay. And here I'm expecting my opponent to like do something like link away the Protector Whelp and the Buster Dragon, since it's going to grave next turn anyway, for like a Verite Anaconda, or like link away with the Buster Blader rather, since it has to be in grave, and then use the Memories to go for like a fusion guy, and then make a copy of Dragoon, and then just do that for a bit. But my opponent just straight up makes BLS, goes into battle phase, forgets about Cursed Eldlich restriction that he can't attack, and then he just concedes there. So yeah, my opponent probably should have just won this game, but that's kind of just what happens on Edipro sometimes. But this is more of a showcase of like another shortcoming of this deck. But definitely you saw in the last game that the deck has its strengths too, but I felt like it was still worth showcasing off. So you can consider this a loss for all purposes against a player who was able to, take the game state into a winning position. But still thought that I would just showcase this one as part of the matchup here. So our final matchup here is going to be against Eldlich Volcanic. Now, I know, of course, that Volcanic is not necessarily what you would call meta, but this is going to be more of a demonstration of what to do against the Eldlich portion of the deck, because that's going to be what's primarily important, is trying to outgrind. Also, just generic traps is something to think about, because there's a lot of traps this format. So, playing against like a nerfed version of Torrential Tribute is fine enough to where I thought it's still decently good enough to showcase anyways. So our opponent's going to go first and set 3 and pass. We draw a copy of Debug. We have double Debug, double Mining, which is unfortunate, but we are able to at least get a guaranteed play here. We can go for a Bailings after grabbing Gazelle and then get a Sanctuary. Our opponent's going to Ice Dragon's Prison here so that we can't relink and trigger Gazelle, but we have the Mining anyways for that, so that's pretty nice. We're able to send away the Jaguar for a Spinny to just get another extender, and then send a copy of Roar off this Gazelle that we summon. From here we can use Spinny effect to bring itself back and then go into a copy of Wolf. We can then relink the Wolf to just add back the Roar just in case. And then we're going to go ahead and Ash the copy of Scarlet when we go into battle phase and attack with the Wolf here. Then we're going to use the Jack Jaguar in the main phase too. And then we're going to add back actually a copy of Ash here because I want to make sure that I have enough protection. And then here relink into another Wolf and then pass turn. My opponent is going to go ahead and Scarlet for a Conquistador, but then just scoop because of the fact that my opponent doesn't really have any further interaction. Yes, I know the Volcanic cards didn't do anything, but stay with the rest of the match here. I promise that there's actually something here to look at. So that last game showed pretty much no Volcanic cards in action, but this time they're actually going to be what causes him to see success in this game. So opponent's going to go first again, normal summoning a copy of Volcanic Rocket, adding a copy of Reload to hand, setting 2 and passing. Now you'll notice he's on the Dragoon package, which is going to come up. We draw a copy of Ash Return, which is very on time as per usual. We're going to go ahead and circle for a copy of Jaguar, and I make the mistake here of being very greedy. I go mining to pitch the Jaguar, when I should probably just pitch a copy of Cosmic instead. Now I wanted to have answers in case these were like a Golden Lord or Golden Land trap, plus the Reload that I know. But in reality, not using my normal summon here is actually going to be able to actually come back to bite me here. So we go ahead and trigger off the Gazelle from that position and then use it to send a copy of Roar to Graveyard. Then we use Bailings to add a copy of the Sanctuary before using Desires here. I go ahead and draw Twin Twister and Desires, so I would have actually had enough answers anyways, so pitching the Cyclone was correct even before we drew the Twin, but it's especially correct now that we know that we have Twin. But I go ahead and use Jaguar because I'm actually just completely out of extenders, and I have to put the Gazelle back in deck, which is really janky, but we can get it back. We go ahead and recover a bit by using Wolf into Wolf, and then we reset the Roar off its own effect so we can add back Circle. So this is to get Gazelle back for next turn, and I'm thinking, alright, even though I can't clear his board, I'm in a decent spot, and we can just go ahead and proceed from there. Now, I don't set these in the end phase, and the reason is that I'm expecting one of these to be a Golden Land trap so I can just Cosmic it. But I also did not realize that my opponent just didn't have any of that. So now I look like a little bit of a fool. I should have set one of these for sure. Go ahead, and he's going to use a Blaze Accelerator reload, and I could Twin Twister it, but he would get his Scatter Shot to grave no matter what. And here is where I made the critical mistake, is that I don't realize that Scatter Shot actually sends for cost. I did not know that. So Scatter Shot sending for cost actually means that he's actually able to just wipe my entire board free of consequence. Now, to be fair, we do have the Bailings in the graveyard, so we are able to just protect it. But that does also get punished a little bit later, as you're about to see as well. My opponent has the Golden Lord, setting away what he knows is Roar since it was set via its own effect. So if I had, well, it wouldn't have mattered, I guess, if I had used the Roar earlier or if I used it now, or like, it wouldn't have mattered either way because my opponent would have just used the Lord to send away the Wolf. So either way, I was pretty doomed from the start. My opponent goes into a copy of Volcanic Shell, into Link Rebo, grabbing another shell, and then going to Verite Anaconda. Now, I can actually Ash this Avarice, which is decent, but it's not actually going to be enough to solve the problem here. So he's going to use the Lord to bring itself back, and then use Verite Anaconda. Now, I made the mistake of using this to add a copy of Gazelle, and I realized after, I'm like, wait, that was kind of dumb, because he's just going to pop my board anyways. What I should have done was actually use this other effect to make this unaffected by monster effects, so he can't Dragoon pop it, and then he would get in for 1200 plus, what is this, 35, so it's 47 plus 5 is notably not 65. So that was a mistake that I made. Now, granted, again, that would just left me with no engine, so it's not really a case of me being able to say, oh, I would have won this game regardless, but once I realized I made that mistake, we're just going to move into game number 3 here. Now, that's a game that I can mostly attribute to not the deck, but my own misplays, because that was mostly my own fault for losing. But you can see that the deck can also struggle if you are not well equipped to actually have enough interruptions to combat what your opponent is doing, which, to be fair, I definitely didn't have that many interruptions there. But we're going to go ahead and go first in game 3, and we drew Sanctuary again. We've drawn Sanctuary quite a lot. We go ahead and use Circle for a copy of Gazelle. And we do that in draw phase to play around Joel. I didn't do that in a previous game, I think, but it's because sometimes you just can't hold A in time. We're going to use Desires after getting the Gazelle out of our deck so we can then draw and hopefully get extenders. We don't. We have to normal summon the Gazelle, but it's okay because we're able to just send the Jaguar and then make a Wolf and then bringing it back off the Will to add the Gazelle back to our hand. And we add back the Circle. We're in a pretty good spot. I don't have to set both the Cosmics just because I feel that blind hitting back row isn't that great. But just in case, we go ahead and just set it. Now, my opponent goes for a Red Ice Fusion, and we have to roar it because beating Dragoon is hard. And our opponent sets 4, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not really going to blind Cosmic here. We draw a copy of Sign Up Mining, which is alright. We go ahead and use Circle because I didn't get the chance to in my opponent's end phase. My opponent uses the Ice Dragon's Prison in response to that, getting rid of the Jack Jaguar out of my graveyard and then banishing both. But now this just lets me know that, okay, you're searching Jaguar off of this Circle here. I go ahead and add a copy of Lady Debug, then I trigger Gazelle because of the Sign Up Mining sending the Jaguar. I use that to send a copy of Foxy because I plan on adding a Spinny with this. I will back the Sunlight Wolf, summon a Bailings, add back the Gazelle, and then my opponent goes for Walk Hero Chain Scarlet, but I have the Cosmic for it, and he has the reload, and then I have the other Cosmic, so I'm like, alright, I have to play through one Golden Lord. I should be able to OTK. Spoiler alert, I mess it up. So, we're going to go ahead and go into another copy of Wolf just to make sure that things, in case they go awry, I have some interruption, which they do. Then normal summon a copy of Lady Debug and add a copy of Spinny like I mentioned. Now here is the mistake. I put Splash Mage in the wrong zone. The Splash Mage should be in the left zone. The reason being is that the plan is to make Transcode Talker with the Wolf and some monster into this zone in the center right here. Transcode Talker points right. So if I do it here, I can't use Transcode effect. So the goal was to use, it was actually update Jammer and then go into Transcode. So I can then update Jammer, make the Transcode attack twice, and then use the update Jammer that was brought back off the Transcode plus the Splash Mage to make a Zero Boros that could also attack twice. But I messed up by putting this in the wrong zone, and I realized this after I summoned back this debug. I'm like, oh, I done goofed here. Yeah, this doesn't actually accomplish anything. So here I just go for a really scuffed play of ending on a bunch of monsters and passing. It's not pretty, and I'm not proud of this gameplay, but you gotta show it off sometimes. People do make mistakes. I am not impervious to mistakes here. My opponent attacks, getting the Bailing Salamangreat, but I am actually able to trigger Sunlight Wolf, which is funny. He then uses Shell, and then uses the Golden Lure to bring itself back to hand, so he can clear my Roar, which he knows I have set as well, same as game 2. But my opponent uses Verite effect, and then realizes that the Red Ice Fusion was already in graveyard. I think he said he thought that he had another one, but he probably cited it out, and that is thankfully the end of the game there. Alrighty, so some concluding thoughts on this deck. First off, I want to apologize again to the entire audience for my pretty bad misplays in there. Like I said, I'm not a very experienced Salamangreat pilot, and even though we walked away with a lot of the games where we misplayed in, it doesn't excuse poor play, and I definitely am not the most adept at this deck, but again, you gotta show it off sometimes that, people do make mistakes, and I don't want to give the illusion that I'm a perfect player by any means. But we're back with the deck here, and this is a pretty good representation, I think, of what Salamangreat does and doesn't do. There's just a lot of instances where you can just outguide your opponent if you have a lot of resource sweeping going on, but other times you just can't adequately stop your opponent and you just die. There's not really a whole lot to say or do about it. It's kind of been the same problems with Salamangreat for a while, but nevertheless, it is still its core deck identity in that it is recursive and is able to keep resources very nicely if it is able to get into a longer game state, which will happen more often in those control matchups. So that's something you can look forward to if you are looking to play this deck. But overall, it's a very solid budget deck, and it's what it has been for quite some time. So that is what the deck is best known for. But that's going to do it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more informative Yu-Gi-Oh content. If you want to, you can follow me on all social media platforms or support me via Patreon or TCG Player. All the links in the description as usual. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.